Chapter 2. I remember standing there in Aunt Lottie's kitchen watching this confrontation and feeling very confused. I could not understand how Muddy could be like this. It seemed to me to be so hypocritical. All my life, she had made herself out to be this ardent pacifist, always speaking out against the war. After all, there had been a huge rift in our family because of it. And now here she was, full of unforgiving anger and hateful, vengeful, even towards someone who may have been in the uniform of our enemy, but who was trying all he could to be kind and consolatory and helpful. I wanted to tell her what I thought of her there and then, but I just did not feel I could do it so in front of Peter. It was not the moment. And there was something else that was troubling me even more than this, something I was feeling and knew I should not be feeling, something I could not speak of, least of all to Muddy, and certainly not to Carly. I could tell no one because it was too terrible, because no one would understand. My mind was in turmoil. I had to get out. I ran out of the house and went out across the farmyard to be with Marlene. It was as I was sitting there in the hay, watching her chomping away, that I told her the dreadful truth that I had dared tell no one. When I speak of it now, all these years later, I sound like a silly romantic girl, and of course, that is just what it was. I sat there and I cried my heart out and told an elephant if you please, that I loved this man, this airman, this enemy, whom I had not known for 24 hours, that I knew I would love him till the day I died. It sounds ridiculous, I know, but that is what I felt. And when you are 16, you feel things very immediate, very strongly, and very certainly. How wicked is that, Marlene, I said. How wicked is that to love someone who should be my enemy, who has just bombed my city, killed my friends? How wicked is that? I looked up into her weepy eye. For the answer, she wafted her ears gently at me and groaned deep inside herself. It was enough to tell me that she had listened and understood, and that she did not judge me. I learned something that day from Marlene about friendship, and I have never forgotten it. To be a true friend, you have to be a good listener, and I discovered that day Marlene was the truest of friends. For some time I stayed there out in Uncle Manfred's hay barn. Marlene was the only being in the entire world that knew my secret, and I wanted to be with her and no one else. It was hard to bring myself to go back inside the house. I think it was only the cold that drove me back inside. Exhausted, I suppose, from our long walk through the snow, and still trying to get ourselves warm, we were upstairs in bed by late afternoon, all three of us in the big bedroom above the kitchen, Aunt Lottie and Uncle Manfred's room. We huddled there together under piles of blankets, leaving Peter downstairs sleeping in the chair by the stove. Muddy put a chair up against the bedroom door. I do not trust that man, she said, and I was far too tired to argue by then. We slept all through the rest of that day and through the night. When I came downstairs into the kitchen the next morning, Peter was sitting at the table, a map open in front of him. He smiled when he saw me and called me over at once. I want to show you something, Elizabeth. I've been thinking about this all night, he said. You are traveling west, aren't you, away from the Russians? I have seen the roads. They are full of refugees, all going west. That is where I have to go too. So you are going where I am going. I think the nearest Allied armies are about there, by Heidelberg. The American army. They are about 200 miles away, maybe more. I'm not sure. A long way, that's all I know. But with my compass, we could do it, I think. I cannot go by the roads. They will be too dangerous for me in my uniform. We could go across country, travel a lot by night, lie up by day. I have to go. I cannot just wait here to be caught. You understand? Muddy spoke up from behind me. I had not seen her come in. We are going nowhere, she said icily. Then I shall have to go on my own, Peter told her. I have to get home. Surely you can understand that. So that you can come back to Germany and bomb us more, I suppose, Muddy replied. She shrugged and walked past him towards the stove. You go if you want to. I do not care anymore. I cannot stop you. I know that now. It was foolish of me to think that I could, but we are staying here. She turned to me then. Marlene will be needing some more water, Elizabeth, she went on. You could take her down to the stream. I noticed it was not iced up yesterday. It was still running. All I was thinking, all I was trying to say, Peter interrupted, was that I think we might all have a better chance if we stay together, if we help one another. With my compass, I can guide you to the Americans, and when we meet up with them, I could help. The children are too tired to move on, said Muddy. She was adamant. She would not hear of it. And anyway, we do not need your help. We have managed quite well on our own up until now. We shall wait a few days for the snow to clear and then move on. We do not need you. We do not want you. I could no longer contain myself. I really gave her a piece of my mind. I told her she was just being ridiculous, that we did need Peter's help, and that she knew it. I stormed out then, went to the barn, and led Marlene down to the stream for a drink. She drank long and deep, enjoying every moment of it, filling her trunk again and again, then pouring the water down her throat. Once she had finished drinking, she began sloshing her trunk about and splashing me with icy water, which I did not appreciate after all. After a while, I tried to encourage her to come away, leading her by the trunk by the ear, imitating Carly's clicking noises, which I knew she responded to, trying to get her to move. But nothing I did or said would budge her from that stream. She wandered down into it now, ignoring me completely. I was wet, I told her. I was cold. I begged her to come out, but she was no longer in a listening mood. That was when I heard Muddy screaming, not from the house, as I first thought it must be, but from the lakeside beyond. I left Marlene and ran. I could hear Carly shrieking too now. It was not until I was through the farmyard gate and out into the field that I could begin to understand what was happening. There was a hole in the ice about halfway between the lakeside and the island. It was Carly. He had fallen through the ice. All I could see of him was a dark head and flailing hands as he struggled to grab a hold as he tried to keep himself afloat. And Carly could not swim. Muddy was at the water's edge screaming and crying, and Peter was there beside her, holding her back, his arms fast around her. She was fighting him, struggling to break free. You have to stay here, he was telling her. Stay here. It's all right. I can reach him. Leave it to me. Then he caught sight of me and was shouting for me to go and fetch a rope. I remembered that it was the shed next to Tommy's stable that Uncle Manfred kept all of his tools, all the harnesses, chains, ropes, everything. By the time I'd find a rope and run back with it down on the lakeside, I could see Peter was way out on the ice, down on his knees, right by the hole and reaching out for Carly, who kept disappearing under the water. Peter managed to grab a hold of his hands and hang on. I tried to stop Muddy from going out on the ice, but I wasn't strong enough. There was no way she could be left behind any longer. We clung to one another, hardly able to keep our balance as we made our way gingerly across the ice towards them. That is far enough, Peter called. Do not come any closer. Just hang on to the end of the rope, Elizabeth, and let me have the other. I looped it quickly, whirled it around and around my head, and then threw it out as best as I could, but the end of it fell short. I gathered it in and tried again. This time it was close enough for Peter to reach out and catch a hold of it. He was talking to Carly all the while, trying to calm him. Somehow he managed to get the rope around him, under his arms. I've got him, he cried. Now pull, but pull gently. As Muddy and I took the strain on the rope, we could see Peter had grabbed Carly by the back of his coat and was trying to haul him out. Moments later, Carly was lying there, limp on the ice. Peter dragged him away, then picked him up by his arms and came sliding and stumbling past us. Carly was gray in the face and quite lifeless. Muddy was running alongside them, calling all the while for Carly to wake up. Once inside the house, Peter laid Carly down in front of the stove and, with Muddy, peeled off his wet clothes, rubbed him down vigorously, and covered him with blankets. All I could do was stand there and watch, desperate for any sign of life in my little brother. There was none, no movement, no breathing. Muddy was beside herself with despair by now, weeping over Carly and trying to shape him awake. Peter helped her to his feet and turned to me. Look after your mother, will you? He said. So I put my arms around her and just held her tight. All we could do was look in horror and in hope, as Peter knelt over Carly, hands flat on Carly's chest, pumping him, then lifting his chin and blowing deep into his mouth, then pumping again and again. Long minutes went by, the longest of my life, and still Carly did not respond. His lips were blue, and there was a stillness about him that I knew could only mean that it was over, that there was no point in going back, that nothing could be done now to bring him back to life. But Peter was not giving up on him, not for one moment. He stopped only to put his ear to Carly's chest to listen for his breathing. Come on, Carly, he shouted, come on! And then on he went, pumping and pumping. I turned to Muddy and buried my head in her shoulder, both of us weeping uncontrollably. That was when we both heard the sound of spluttering. I looked and saw Carly's eyes opening, and then he was coughing and choking. The water was spurting up out of his mouth onto the kitchen floor. It kept coming and coming until at last it was all out, and he lay there breathing hard, a great smile coming over his face as he recognized us. Peter sat back on his haunches, his hands over his face. I wanted to hug him there and then, hug him tight and never let him go. Muddy was on her knees, cradling Carly in his arms and kissing him all over his face, and Carly was strong enough already to try to push her away. He was never that fond of being kissed by Muddy, or by me, or by anyone else, come to that. I knelt down in front of Peter then and took his hands away from his face. I could see he'd been crying too. I knew that in that moment, as our eyes met, that he felt for me what I was feeling for him. Thank you, I said, still holding his hands in mine. Thank you, thank you. At that time, I think it was almost all the English I knew. Tears soon gave way to laughter through as Muddy berated Carly. She was back to being exasperated mother. Why? What were you doing on the ice, Carly? She cried. What were you thinking of? I was only trying to get to the island, Carly said, to see the treehouse Poppy built for us. I was nearly there, and then the ice broke. It was not my fault. It was the ice's fault. It was too thin. Uncle Manfred's clothes were a little small on the side for Peter, we discovered, and the trousers hung loose around his waist, but they were dry, and that was all that mattered. He was soon sitting by the stove with Carly's still wrapped up in a blanket beside him, and Carly was telling him about our treehouse on the island and how the two of us used to play pirates over there, Pirates from Treasure Island, Poppy's favorite book when he was a boy, and how Carly was always Long John Silver because he was better at limping than I was, and because he was better at being bloodthirsty than I was too. All this time, Muddy was at the stove buying herself making potato soup. She had gone quite silent, I had noticed. She seemed deep in thought. She had not said a word to Peter since Carly's rescue, not even when he came downstairs dressed in Uncle Manfred's clothes and clogs. Carly and I had laughed and laughed, but Muddy still looked stony-faced. There was a change, though. She was no longer telling us not to speak to him, and the pitchfork was nowhere to be seen. We were sitting down at the table, enjoying the warmth of our soup, and Carly was still playing at being Long John Silver. It was yo-ho-ho after every sip of soup, accompanied by his squawky parrot noises. Peter and I looked at one another over our soup and smiled. We were not only smiling at Carly's antics, we were smiling into each other's eyes. I knew at once that it was the police at the door the moment I heard the knocking. I saw the alarm in Peter's eyes. No one knocks at the door like the police.